The Tarrant County Master Gardener Association has partnered with the Tarrant Regional Water District to encourage water conservation. TRWD maintains 4 area lakes and pipelines needed to provide surface water to local water treatment plants so they can clean that water to meet drinking standards for our communities. They also work with many cities in Tarrant County, such as Fort Worth, Arlington, Mansfield, and many others, to provide water conservation programs to the community. Conservation is an important water supply strategy to help meet the needs of our growing population. There are currently 2.3 million people living in Tarrant County, and this is expected to double over the next 50 years. At SaveTarrantWater.com, you can sign up for free weekly watering advice custom to your location. If you're a resident of Tarrant County, you can sign up for a free sprinkler's checkup where a licensed irrigator comes to your home, provides a comprehensive evaluation of your system with recommendations to reduce water waste. There's also an event calendar where you can find information about future classes and workshops. So be sure and check out SaveTarrantWater.com to sign up for their free services.
Hello, my name is Donna Parikka. I'm a Tarrant County Master Gardener, and today we're going to take up where we left off and talk about our plan for implementing a tree into your landscape. We previously discussed all of the things you need to make yourself aware of and learn before you decide on which tree you want and which place you want to plant it in, as well as how to shop for one. Today we're going to take up where we left off there and discuss how to plant your tree. I know that some of you have a big interest in gardening. You might really love gardening. You may not love gardening, but you do recognize the importance of trees in our landscape and for our environment. Okay, after you buy your tree, you've got to get it home. This is assuming that the tree is small enough for you to carry it home, that is. Very, very important. Cover it up. If you don't want any air to move over the cover, and make sure it doesn't penetrate underneath it like it balloons out. Never transplant one that is not covered. If it's a balled and burlap tree, the ball should be covered in plastic. That's to hold the moisture in it while it's being transported. The branches should also be tied together to prevent breakage. You can see that picture in that upper right-hand side. Looks like the root ball is pretty. I can't tell if there's plastic on it. It may just be the burlap, but they've covered that up with some kind of netting. Load it real careful. You don't want to break anything off. When you're picking it up, don't pick it up by its trunk. Pick it up by the container or the root ball. And please don't ever drop one. You don't want to break that root ball or upset what's in the container. Once you've got it in your truck or however your trailer or whatever, tie it down really securely. Rolling or any kind of movement during the shipment of it, you can crack the root ball. And that could start to have trouble. If it was cracked, it would be hard to unload, and it would be very hard to get it planted without some damage. When you unload it, irrigate it immediately, and that's before you even plant it. If it's a balled and burlap tree, you can lay it over on its side. Container tree, try to keep it upright so it will absorb some water. The B&B tree, after you get it home, remove any plastic. If it did have the plastic over the burlap of the root ball. If you have a chance, keep them cool and covered. If you have a place you can keep them cooler, you can cover with some soil or any kind of organic matter to prevent the roots from drying out, because you may not have a chance to plant it the same day you bring it home. Just try to avoid the hot sun. Try to plant the same day, but sometimes I know that's not always possible. Okay, we've finished our shopping. The next step is planting the tree. The first step in planting is to prepare the site. Eradicate an area that's greater than the whole diameter and eradicate it of all competing vegetation. This means trees, brush, weeds, turf, rocks, anything. It is okay to use chemicals to remove all this vegetation. Just be sure and follow all your label instructions when any kind of chemical is used. The measurement. Remove mulch and soil from the top of the container if it's in a container. And it's going to be loose, probably be easier to get it off. Sometimes the retailers and the nurseries, they add it to the top for just aesthetic reasons. Makes it look prettier, and it may cover up things that they don't want you to see also. Explore and feel around on the top of the container, and you find the area where the topmost root ball, you can kind of see it in the middle picture. I've drawn the red line. You can see the little topmost root. They've kind of scraped off a little bit of the soil to find it. And this is the secret. You measure from that topmost root to the bottom of the root ball. That is your root ball depth. In the far right picture, you can see where I've drawn the line. That is the root ball depth. That is not the depth of the hole. Your hole depth should always be less than the root ball depth, especially when you got clay like we have, or if you have a situation where the soil's compacted. You want to take a lot of care here. Make sure that the top of the root ball after planting is above grade level. I mean 2 to 3 inches above grade level. Now, there might be some situations where this would not apply, and that's if you were in a very sandy soil. Sandy soils drain very well, so it might not be as crucial. But most of us here in Tarrant County, we have clay soil for the most part. This above grade level recommendation, actually, it contradicts earlier thought and a lot of published thought that the depth should be grade level. This is incorrect. You should always plant above grade level. Now your hole width. And I know this won't be a popular thing, but dig the hole 3 times as wide as that root ball. You might be able to get by with 2 to 3 times, and you'll see a lot. If you get out, especially out on the internet, and they'll say just 2 times. I recommend 3 times the width. Okay, next step, you got to dig a great big hole. And this was a really good illustration I found of what a really big hole looks like, and a really big, ugly one. Ugly, rough, shallow, sloping. I hope you can picture in your minds this hole. This is a really big tree. It probably may have been set down in that tree with in that hole with a forklift. We don't know. But that is the perfect hole to dig. Of course, the right side looks like it was dug with an auger. That is a definite no-no. Do not plant one like that. Here's a picture showing how they roughen up the sides of the hole after they dug the hole. And a tip as you're digging the hole, you might want to put a tarp down so you can put all of your excavation soil out and it won't hurt any of the vegetation. A lot of times you have turf, and a lot of times you're going to be putting that soil directly back in the hole, so it might just make your job a little easier with that tip. Let's stop for a minute and talk a little bit about why the planting hole is so important. This photo on the left is a pretty good example of how typical root growth of a large shade tree, showing the spread horizontal and vertical. The horizontal spread is needed to hold the tree up, but it also absorbs nutrients and oxygen near the surface. The vertical provides support, and it helps find deep moisture. Clay soils like those in Tarrant County, they can restrict the depth that the roots can grow. The illustration on the right side shows a scenario distinctly how the effect of the diameter of the hole can affect this vital root spread that we need. The top drawing has clearly restricted the spread of the roots due to the straight sides and the narrow hole diameter. The second drawing, and it is twice root ball width. It's better, but it's still restricting some of the roots. The third drawing is 3 times, which is my recommendation, and it is the best. The roots are spreading very well. We know that the greater the width of the hole, the better. We know that gradually sloping sides also encourages the spread of the roots. Also note here that this root ball in this diagram, it is well above the grade, the surrounding grade, and it is on a very firm base, so it will not sink. Here's an example of the percolation test. I mentioned it a little while ago. After you've finished digging, consider doing this. This is recommended, especially if you have drainage issues or you suspect you have drainage issues. Try this. It doesn't delay you very much. On the first day, you fill the hole with water and you just let it set. Wait until the next day, and most of the water should have drained into the surrounding area. On the second day, you fill it again. This time, measure the depth of where you fill the water up to. Let it sit overnight again. And if the water level does not substantially drain away overnight, you could have a drainage problem which could affect your tree. You may have to consider an alternate site, or you may have to consider some kind of a drainage system. This is especially true when this is clay, highly compacted. These photos actually appear to be in red soil, which frequently has drainage issues. The next step, finish planting your tree. You've watered it, but double check. Make sure the root ball is moist. If it's not, water it right now and let it sit a while. You remove the tree by sliding it out of the container. Do not lift it by the trunk. If it is a balled and burlap tree, cut and remove the wires and the burlap after it is sitting in the hole as far down as possible. Now, it might have been wrapped in a non-degradable fabric. If that's the case, or you suspect that's the case, make sure you remove this. Any wire left on a root ball could affect a growing root. Try to get that wire, try to pull it out from underneath. The best way to do this is just get all of that protective packaging off there. Examine the root ball. Loosen and spread any roots. If you do have any circling roots, if they're crimped, they're damaged, you may have to prune those. And don't forget the bottom of the tree as well. Don't just look on the sides. When you put the root ball down in the hole, it should be a little bit ruffled up and a little shaggy. You do not have to pull out every single root and spread it perfectly. Do make sure it's a little bit shaggy. You're just trying to give the roots a chance to get out there and find a good place in the surrounding soil. Pick it up and place it in the center of the hole. Remember, we said before, the hole should have a very firm bottom. And here's my little tip, and I learned this from watching my dad, but then I've done it myself. If the root ball is really, really heavy, you can lay it down on its side in the container, and you can cut out the bottom of the container. And at that time, you can examine and spread the roots from the bottom first. Then, without cutting the sides, you can roll the tree into the hole. And then once it's in the hole, you can cut away the sides of the container. I think when I did it, I used tin snips. Mine was a plastic container, and there was no way I could lift the tree up, so I just rolled it. And there was no way that I could reposition the tree once it's down there. So I did a lot of looking at the tree to make sure when I was rolling it that it would be the sides of it the way I wanted it. Now, do this again. Check for the correct depth. The top edge of the root ball should be slightly above the surrounding grade, and I again recommend 2 to 3 inches. And view it from a distance to make sure it's straight. And this is okay for that topmost root to be visible even after you put the soil back in the hole. Next, you backfill. Kind of break up the clumps of the backfill as much as possible. And I know sometimes that's hard in our clay soil. It could be really lumpy. Hold the tree straight and put kind of a shallow ring around the lower portion of the root ball, enough where it's supported and you can stop holding it up, and tamp it in and put some water. This is kind of important. I don't see this mentioned in all of the publications that I have read, but if you'll do that and kind of plant it halfway and get it tamped in, you might be able to avoid staking it if you get it tamped in halfway a little bit. You don't want to just tamp it to where it compresses the roots totally, but you do want a little bit. You can kind of fill it with water. Okay, then you continue filling, and always remember you use the same soil that you took out of the hole. You do not amend this soil in any way. This is a change from what would have been recommended in some years past, when it was thought that amending that soil was beneficial to a newly planted tree. Research has now determined that adding soil amendments such as compost or sand or anything will discourage the roots from spreading into the surrounding soil. And for your tree to be healthy, it has to do this. Now you want to tamp. Remember, tamp it kind of lightly. Don't compact it a lot. Water it as you fill. Never place soil over the root ball, but do slope it and bring it up to the edge. The developing root flare may or may not be visible. It will become more evident as your tree grows, and should be helpful. Again, always use the same soil. And then just thoroughly water it. And the watering is not just to help those stressed roots, but it's going to kind of settle the soil, and it's going to remove air pockets. I think these are good examples of one tree that's not completely planted and 2 that are, of the depth of the soil. These are kind of the good and the bad pictures. The left photo, that tree was planted too deep, and the hole is not wide enough. This is incorrect. Do not do this. The 2 pictures on the right are really good examples of the tree has been almost always planted. They're showing the root ball above the grade at a good depth. And I just want you to note that they probably will take from the edge of that root ball out to where they have dug, and they'll slope it out to the edge. They probably won't leave it with just the edges of it sticking up like that. Now you are almost finished. There's not very much further you need to go. After you have got it planted, the next step is the mulch. I hope these pictures kind of help you better understanding the do's and don'ts of mulching around a tree. What you want to do is add 2 to 3 inches of mulch to the cleared area. Do not let it touch the trunk or cover the root ball. I know this is seen oftentimes. The mulch can never touch the trunk. Some research has found that the mulch on top of the root ball can retain water meant for the root system, provide habitat for animals that can injure the bark, and encourage formation of stem girdling roots. However, The concept of mulch reducing water loss from the root ball has not been demonstrated with research. Still, the optimum situation for a shade tree is nothing under the tree except mulch. And be sure and keep the vegetation out of the whole cleared area. I advise organic mulches. They have advantages over others, since when they decompose, they add organic matter to the soil, which feeds the tree. The wider you can keep the root mulch, the better, even well past the canopy. When I say canopy, that's oftentimes referred to as the drip line. This will encourage the roots to spread out beyond the canopy without competition from turf or other vegetation for water and nutrients. This first photo on the left shows, the upper left shows correct application of mulch immediately after this tree was planted. The one immediately below it that tree is 10 years old, and I have never allowed the mulch to get anywhere close to that trunk. The top photo on the right side shows the mulch pulled away in this instance, and it shows how the bark has become rotted underneath that mulch. That could harm the tree. The right bottom picture is another picture showing bark damage, and this picture, I don't know when they took this. It kind of looks like they might be showing the result from a tree that was planted too deeply, but it could also have been the fault of the mulch. Sometimes the blame for this is a tree that was planted too deeply, and in truth, sometimes it could have been that the tree settled after it was planted, but then often the grade around a tree, even though initially planted correctly, the grade could have risen for whatever reason. Sometimes, whether there's construction or any kind of additional work done on a landscape, you can't let it come above the grade of that, or where that root tree was originally planted. Here's an example of two methods of irrigating a newly planted tree. You want to build a berm of just the mulch around the edge of the root ball. And that is and this is in the right-hand picture, that's if your irrigation is coming from a high volume source like a water hose or a bucket. Suggestion here, do not use soil, just use your mulch, because a lot of times the soil, if you put it around a berm, when it is flattened out, it can end up over the root ball months later. So you can kind of ensure that you don't do that if you just do a berm of mulch. If you're going to use a drip line or some kind of a soaker hose to irrigate your tree, you do not need to do a berm at all, and that is illustrated on this left-hand picture. Here's kind of a generalization. This can vary, but your irrigation kind of can go maybe 3 gallons of water 2 to 3 times a week per 1 inch of trunk diameter for the whole first growing season. This can vary, so you want to check the soil moisture with your finger at least 2 to 4 inches down. You will reduce irrigation to weekly in the second year and bi-monthly in the third year. One of your final tests after you've planted your tree is to consider staking it. If you need to, you may or may not need to. The best thing is that you don't need to. It's not always necessary. In most cases, it is thought that the tree will be stronger without it, but you might want to consider that if your tree is less than about 1.5 inches in diameter, or if you think it's really weak, or if it does not stand up very well, or if you have a real windy site. In Texas, especially in the spring, our wind can affect how a tree grows when it's young. Container-grown trees are a little more likely to need staking. Bald and burlap trees are usually heavy enough that they don't require it. Actually, some movement from the wind is natural, and the little swaying that a tree does in the wind actually helps to strengthen it. There are several methods, both above and below the ground, to stake a tree. Be sure to watch for damage from any staking apparatus to the tree. Try to remove it within a year. The below ground method on the right side is something I have never seen. Actually, you have to do this as you're planting the tree. And what it does, it actually is, you have to do it while you're doing the backfill. And what it is, it's actually holding the tree in place because it's wedged against the root ball. One thing that this will also do, it would keep you from accidentally driving over that root ball. Another thing you may need to do is consider a tree wrap. If your tree already has the bottommost branches removed, the trunk is going to be susceptible possibly to sun scald. Some varieties are more than others, so you may want to consider wrapping it at this time. And this is a real good picture that's purchased tree wrap. Fertilizing, don't do it. You don't need to do that to a tree after it's planted. This contradicts some previous recommendations. And even root stimulator is no longer recommended. Pruning at the time of planting is not recommended because planting is stressful to your tree, and so is pruning, so just avoid pruning immediately after planting. Okay, in summary, I think this is a very good illustration of all the components of a correctly planted tree. You will see that the root ball is slightly above grade to avoid excess moisture from accumulating around the flare, and so oxygen will be provided. The mulch does not touch the trunk, so the bark will not be damaged. The backfill has been brought up to the edge of the root ball, but it doesn't cover the edge of it. It illustrates that the watering is being done as it is backfilled. The mulch is at the correct depths, approximately 2 to 3 inches. Don't ever go over 4 inches of mulch. It shows the soil berm. In this case, it looks like they use the soil. I wouldn't recommend using the soil. This picture just shows it that way. I would just use mulch. It's been added to the outer edge because we have the high water source. The hose is pictured there. The bottom of the root ball is sitting on a very firm soil, so it will not sink. The hole has been backfilled with original soil. I'm going to repeat, with original soil that was excavated from the hole. And you can see that the width of the hole is about 3 times the width of the root ball. Okay, a little bit of information about some of the recommended tree species and varieties in our area. This list that I have here is a really comprehensive list, and it is recommended by Arborological Services Incorporated. And I'm showing you this because, for one, I value their opinion about trees that occur in our area, and it would be a good starting point for your research for the tree species that's best in your situation. Their size categories that are shown here, they may differ from what I've seen in the research. Sometimes small trees are under 30, medium trees, sometimes 30 to 45, large 50. And so this varies. So please be open-minded. Sometimes these are generalizations as far as size is concerned. And these are just estimated. Habitat can make a big difference. Remember, as we talked about, the tree depends on your right place. And I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about the right tree and some of these that are the most often seen on recommended lists from horticulturists. When it comes to the best trees for our area, it's all about oaks. But there are other choices. There's many choices. And I personally think that some of these trees could be currently out of favor and many that I do not have an experience with. And as we discussed earlier, knowing the mature size of your tree is important. And residential lot sizes have become smaller over the years as contractors, they just seek to build more houses in less space. So that makes the medium and the smaller sized trees really good options. Please do not plant a tree variety on your lot if your lot is only 30 foot from your, if your street is only 30 foot from your house. Also, in many circumstances, a lot of side yard just will not accommodate a tree of any size. And another thing, if you have volunteer saplings, sprouts come up in your yard, they may not accommodate these either. And so you want to take those into consideration. And in most circumstances, you want to remove those. If I had to pick a tree that is the most discussed tree, it would be the live oak. And I believe the reason for this is they have what everybody desires, and that is an evergreen characteristic in that it remains green and live, so to speak, in the winter. But live oaks are not true evergreens. They actually drop their leaves in the spring instead of the fall. But in the spring, they immediately grow new leaves, and so it makes them seem as though they are evergreen. They are prone to oak wilt, and that is one of the worst tree diseases in history. Live oaks are actually part of the red oak family. Other oaks in the white oak family are much less prone to oak wilt. Live oaks are very drought tolerant, heat and cold tolerant, and are famous for being able to adapt to their habitat. Many have suffered damage in our temperatures when they bleach below zero for an extended period of time. This is something to think about in the future about live oaks. They have been known to tolerate flooding if it does not keep them wet for an extended period of time, but they can succumb if floodwaters remain around their root zones. The scientific classifications for live oak is kind of complicated. Some live oaks often occurring in our area are called Quercus fusiformis, commonly known as the escarpment live oak or just as Texas live oak. Escarpment is a geological term referring to the Panhandle area of Texas. The actual range of the escarpment live oak are Texas, Oklahoma, and Mexico. The thing is, they overlap with the southern live oak. That's called Quercus virginiana, and it occurs mostly in the southeast and into Texas. The acorns differ slightly. The thing about these two forms of live oak, when they hybridize, it's real hard to tell one from the other. The escarpment live oak is smaller than the southern live oak. It only ranges up to 50 foot, only spreads up to 40 foot, while the southern live oak can go to 80 foot tall, and it's more likely to be upwards to the 50. Spreads. A southern live oak can spread 100 foot, and there has been examples of them even greater than that. One thing that is their big characteristic is their canopy tends to be about twice as wide as they are tall when they're in their native habitat. And you can see the difference in these two pictures. when they can grow unconstrained, they kind of form an umbrella shape. Pictures of the leaves, if you're interested here, they're small and the acorn. And then this one picture is one of the famous historical trees in Texas, the big tree in Rockport, Texas. This is the bur oak, and it is my favorite large tree. It's called a Quercus macrocarpa, and macro in Latin stands for large. Carpa means finger. It is on the Texas Superstar list and a lot of other preferred lists. It is adaptable to many soils. It's a Texas native. It's large, up to 80 foot tall, and it can go 70 foot wide, which makes it suitable only for very large yards. The acorns are only about 2 inches long, and 2 inches wide and long. They're almost round, but they're enclosed in this thick little mossy cup, like in this upper left-hand corner. And I lightened that photo up a little bit more so it would better illustrate the little mossy cup. That makes them unique amongst most of the other oak trees. You can always identify one. Their leaves, they're also unusual. They're huge, deeply lobed, and they're really unique. In that lower right-hand picture, that is Mrs. Neil Sperry holding 2 very large oak leaves. The leaves make them easy to identify. The trunk is thick, the branches are large, and they kind of had a tendency to twist. As you can see in the middle picture is a mature one, and my little bur oak, the upper right-hand corner, it's only about 10 years old, but it's also showing that twisted branching habit this tree has. Sometimes aphid, spider mites, and sooty mold can affect these, but it's not a serious threat. Sometimes I get lace bugs. I have treated, but now I'm trying to be a little bit more environmentally friendly, so I don't treat mine anymore. If they get it, it doesn't seem to bother them very much. If you want to treat for those, it's best to use a systemic. It's a little bit more environmentally friendly than spraying with a insecticide. This is another one of my favorite trees. I have one in my front yard. Mine is growing in red clay. It does not get any irrigation except for my sprinkler system, except for this year. And because of the drought, I deep soaked it twice. It is a white oak. It's Texas native. It occurs naturally in chalky hillsides, which is why it is much more drought soil and heat tolerant than the bur oak. The bur oak kind of likes deeper soil. This tree is quite a bit smaller. It matures at 50 to 60 foot, width at 40 foot. It is a little smaller than the other oak trees in the large category. It has very distinctive bark. It's kind of beige to gray, and it looks kind of flaky, especially as the tree gets older. Leaves are 4 to 6 inches long, and they're sawtooth. They don't look like most oak leaves that are lobed. And you kind of see here in the picture, its distant cousin is the swamp chestnut oak. There are similar leaves, but they occur only in far southeast Texas. The chinkapin, and by the way, there's 2 spellings. I put both of them on there, both acceptable. This tree, the acorns are half to roughly 1.25 inches. They only take 1 season to mature. They're actually edible. I have new sprouts coming up all around mine. I hate to cut them off, but I know I have to. I recommend this tree highly. This picture on the right side, I took a picture of it looking up into the branches of my tree. Now, it's only 10 years old, but it's already a beautiful specimen in my yard. The bald cypress is actually a conifer, but it's deciduous, which makes it a little bit different. That's kind of why it got its name, bald. It is the state tree of Louisiana. It is hardy to a lot of different soil types. It can stand wet, salty, dry, swampy. It's considered a little slower growing. It gets to about 60 to 70 feet tall. Some have been found to be as high as 100 foot. The tree is kind of stringy and grayish brown to reddish brown, and the trunk is very, very straight with a flared base. It has the best branching structure with a thick trunk, smaller, evenly radial spaced lateral branches. It's kind of a pyramidal shape, and it's often seen in rows along park lakes. The needle-like leaves, they're kind of soft. They turn a little reddish in the fall and they drop off. It has a close relative called the pond cypress. The way you can tell them apart is the needles on the pond cypress, they attach only to one side of the stem. So when you look at it from the side, the little needles look like they're all standing up on top of the stem. It's important to remember this distinction because the pond cypress prefers a lot more irrigation than the bald cypress. The bald cypress is also famous for the fact that it produces a little growth off the roots called cypress knees. They kind of protrude upward through the soil. Not all the time, just on some. It has been thought that this is a response to oxygen deprivation, but others disagree as to the origin of the cypress knees. The pecan tree is another large tree with edible fruit. And although the native variety does not produce nuts like those grown for commercial harvesting, it is, however, a very good shade tree. It normally grows 70 to 100 foot tall and has been known to reach as high as 150. The spread can vary a lot depending on if the location is open or wooded. The pecan has been the state tree of Texas since 1919. It is susceptible to foliage and nut diseases which may require spraying periodically. It has a compound leaf. There are over 1,000 varieties, but only 18 are recommended for Texas if your intent is to grow the tree for its crop. The shoe-marred red oak is a large shade tree prized for its fall color. It was named for Benjamin Franklin Shoemard, who was a former state geologist of Texas. It is native to the eastern two-thirds of Texas. It grows upward maybe 50 to 100 foot tall, and it spreads 50 to 60 foot tall. Its shape is a little more upright and pyramidal than some of the other oaks, especially when young. It has a more desirable branching structure usually. It adjusts to all types of soil, including slightly alkaline and disease-resistant, although it can get oak wilt. The leaves are deeply lobed, sharp-tipped, and may not fall off in the fall. They may stay on for a few months into the winter. It is similar to the Texas red oak, but is larger, and it is considered more hardy. It hybridizes with the Texas red oak, making identification difficult. A tip: buy from a reputable nursery that is sure your specimen is a shoemard and not a pin oak. The pin oak cannot tolerate our alkaline soil. This tree can be susceptible to sun scald, so it is best to wrap the trunks, especially if the temporary lower branches have already been pruned off. Here is another option if you have a place large enough for one of the larger trees, is a cedar elm. This is a tree that occurs in our area. It's large and kind of oval shaped shade tree. The horticultural name is Ulmus crucifolia, which the crucifolia means thick leaves. So you can see on the picture of the leaves, they are kind of thick. They don't bend easily. This tree, slightly drooping branches. It is one of the smaller ones in the elm family. They're dark green serrated and sandpaper-like leaves. The sandpaper is always one way to tell an elm from another tree. It grows 50 to 80 foot tall, 40 to 60 foot wide. Its native habitat was originally with junipers often junipers are often mistakenly called cedars. And so that's why we think it may have been named cedar elm because of its original habitat. I have always observed these trees to be slightly faster growing, especially in deep soils, and a little more upright than some of the oaks. And I think they're a good choice for a residential lot. You can see the picture in the middle, it's kind of upright, where the older tree shows a little bit more of a spreading form. Here is another one, sometimes considered a large tree, sometimes not quite so large. I think it normally only gets about 40 foot tall and 40 foot wide. It would fit into most residential lots, and it works as a good shade tree. It's native to China, Japan, and Korea. It is not a Texas native, but it's been very well adapted to Texas. Sometimes it is called a Chinese elm. It tolerates many different soils and drought. It has leaves that are slightly larger than the cedar elm, and it is an elm that is resistant to Dutch elm disease. It's kind of vase-shaped canopy with kind of a flaking bark. Its bark is well-known characteristic if you're trying to identify one of these trees, and that bark color can vary widely. It can be kind of an ivory, almost to rust in between seasons and specimens. This picture, the middle upper one, is one I took of the very old, very large lacebark elm that's right outside the doorway of the Fort Worth Botanic Garden. And then there is another picture of the bark, and it shows a slightly different color, but they can almost be an ivory color. And the bark makes them really unusual. The lacy oak. This is kind of a star in my opinion. I wish I had one in my yard. I just don't have room. If I ever had a chance, I would plant one. It is the only oak on the medium-sized list, and I have never taken a class or listened to a tree specialist that did not recommend this tree. Find one if you can. It is gorgeous. And this photo that I have in the middle, it really doesn't do it justice. I had a hard time finding photos, and I didn't have one that I had taken personally that I could use of this particular tree. It is bright dark green, and that picture kind of shows it a little bit lighter. That's not a true picture. It kind of does have that blue tint. The leaves are they're kind of heavy, and the canopy is kind of irregular. It doesn't follow one form necessarily. The leaf shape kind of varies. Some can be lobed and some non-lobed on the same tree. This leaf picture I have in here on the lower right shows a lot of lobed ones, but you can find pictures where they are not lobed at all. So that's something kind of, a lot of trees do this, but this is mentioned a lot in all of the research I did about this tree. Its mature height is about 40 foot. The width is, this is what makes it nice. The width is only 15 to 30 foot, so you can fit this into a smaller yard. It is a Texas native, which I like. It resembles a miniature white oak, but it's a whole lot tougher. It tolerates heat and drought, and it grows best in well-drained limestone soils, but it can survive on drained clay soil as well. It can be grown in East Texas, but it is best adapted to the Texas Hill Country, suitable for zones 7 through 9, and it is on currently on the Texas Superstar list. Recommend this one highly. Another medium tree that is suitable for our area is the Shantung maple. It is considered a medium tree. They are a lot more tolerant of sun, and they're easier to maintain than the other maple that is talked about a lot, and that being the Japanese maple. This tree is 30, 40 foot tall. It's considered kind of fast growing. at about 3 foot a year. And that, if that's true, I hope for everybody, I don't have personal experience with this tree, but I hope for everybody that it would grow 3 foot a year. It is somewhat drought tolerant, but it actually prefers twice a week irrigation. It can be susceptible to trunk scald, so at planting you may want to wrap its trunk. It's native to China, adapted in Texas, but it's on the Texas Superstar list. So it might be a choice if you want a maple, but do not have the shade to accommodate. If you don't have a shady place for a Japanese, if you have too much sun, this might be a maple that will be good for your spot. Here's another maple. This one is a Texas native. That makes it quite a bit different than the other maples. Its name, and I'm probably not pronouncing this right, is Grandidumentatum, is Latin for large tooth. It grows to about 50 foot tall, so it's a little bit bigger, 40 foot wide, and it has good fall color. It will accept our alkaline soil. It is somewhat drought tolerant, and it prefers higher elevations, but it does accept lower. It is a Texas native. May not be as drought tolerant as some. The ginkgo biloba. I just have to include this tree after I saw this beautiful specimen in the Fort Worth Botanic Garden, and that's the lower right-hand corner. This tree is just so pretty, and I read quite a bit about it. I don't have any personal experience with it. It has quite a story behind it. It is ancient, and it grows in the wild in China. But when you read on Wikipedia, it says it is a prehistoric, as fossil remains date back to the 8th century, or 270 million years ago. Quite a story, and there's a whole lot more to that. I'm not going to elaborate on it with all the fossil remains that they have found. It's on the medium list here. It says it matures 60 to 150 foot. Maybe it's possible that they don't quite get that large in Texas. The distinguishing characteristics are the little fan-shaped leaves. They're a pretty bright green. They're just gorgeous, and then they turn yellow in the fall. And I put the illustration, the drawn illustration. The center picture is from the Dallas Arboretum. It looks just like the picture, although those look like very young trees. The one on the far right is in the Fort Worth Botanic Garden, and it's an older tree. But I would love to have one of these in my yard. So if you want something that is a conversation piece, the ginkgo is definitely it. The crepe myrtle. A lot of people don't know it, and I didn't either until I read about it. It is the official state shrub of Texas. But it's not just a shrub. It's most oftenly used here as a small ornamental tree. If you want a plant that grows, this is your pick. It just grows. They're most commonly seen in their multi-trunked form, but they can also be grown as a single trunk. When I go to California, most of the time out there, I see it in its single trunk form, whereas most of the time here, I see it in multi-trunk. The color and varieties are absolutely endless. Some are better suited for our area. They grow real fast. They have a long bloom time, and that's what makes them so sought after. They range from 1 foot to 30 foot. Depends on the variety. Remember that. They can go as low as 1 foot tall. They thrive in many types of soil, even some in alkaline clay. They're drought tolerant, but they may not survive if your drainage is poor. Some of the species have peeling bark, and this is normal, characteristic. The new bark underneath makes them easier damaged by weed eaters and lawn trimmers, so I would always recommend mulching a large area around this tree. Recommend that anyway, but especially this tree to avoid damage. No pruning of this tree is necessary. The only time you want to prune one is to take off the new basal sprouts from the bottom, or if you have any crossing or dead branches on the interior of the tree. Topping this tree is very bad for it. It cannot be corrected. If this happens to you, if you obtain one of these trees and it has been topped, I would talk to a knowledgeable arborist, possibly let them try to correct it. But the topping of a crepe myrtle, the topping of any tree for that matter, is not recommended, but it's especially bad for this tree. It's resistant to most pests and diseases. It has an aphid that feeds on the sap, and it produces a little honeydew, and that leads to sooty, what they call sooty mold, and that can be the little dark areas on the trunk. You can control that with a systemic or insecticidal soap. They also have bark scale, and that is the little white little pest, and when you squash one, it oozes pink. That's how you can tell the white bark scale. Those can also lead to the sooty mold. You can wash those off, which I have done, with a mild soap solution, or you can use a systemic. Both have worked for me. I'm now trying to avoid systemics at all possible. My trees are older and I'm seeing less and less scale on them. The sooty mold, it's usually just ugly, but severe cases, they can be a health risk to the tree. That's why you kind of need to watch out for it. They can get powdery mildew. Some varieties are more resistant than others. And these pictures, they came from my yard. I wanted to show you the far right one so I could show you. This is a Muskogee crepe myrtle, and I wanted to show you this so you can see the possible color in the fall. Sometimes it just depends on the amount of rainfall we've gotten. I think the more rainfall, the prettier they are in the fall with their color. More on the crepe myrtle. I added this picture. This was put out on the internet by crepemyrtletrails.org, and it shows in one picture varieties that do well in here, so you can compare the colors. I think this would be a slide to make a screen print off of as you shop for a crepe myrtle, and also the sizes. These are recommended varieties. Not all crepe myrtles are recommended for our area. Matter of fact, the one I have, the Muskogee, is no longer recommended because I think the tips freeze. I haven't had a problem with it with mine, but this slide is probably going to tell you the best varieties. You can grow them as a shrub. A 5-foot one can grow as a shrub in your flower bed. One that gets upwards to 25 foot like mine are, they are not appropriate for a flower bed. As you can see, this plant's a wonderful plant. It can just go anywhere. A lot of people don't realize that they can be grown in a pot, and they can also be grown as a shade tree. The Yaupon holly, it's kind of become a staple in flower beds. It's evergreen, and it provides a height change, especially in the corners of a house, which is where you see it most often. It's just a favorite of landscapers. I still like it, even though it might be a little old-fashioned. I still like it because it grows and it is happy all of the time. You can use it along with a dwarf yaupon shrub and a few evergreen hollies, and you will always have something green in your beds year-round. I have always used this plant as a green background for my perennial ornamental grasses and annuals. It can be grown multi-trunked or single. It'll go 12 to 45 foot tall, but it's usually kept no higher than about 25 foot. The leaves are dark green and usually 1.5 inches long. The female plants produce red berries. The bark is kind of a pale taupe to gray. It kind of shows off curving trunks that are created by pruning when you're creating the multiple trunked look. You want to prune to avoid any rubbing branches and, of course, to kind of create this curving look. It's aggressive grower. Probably in the right conditions, you will prune it twice a year, especially if you have to contain it in a specific area. It's also can be used as a clipped hedge or in a landscape area where you want to screen out. There is a variety of this yaupon, and it is called Pride of Houston, and it has a more upright growth tendency. There's also a variety that is deciduous, meaning it loses its leaves in the winter, and it is called a possum haw. It's very similar. The negatives to a yaupon: the sprouts that come up from the base of the roots on some specimens. I had one garden that I had about 12 or 14 of these trees in my garden, and some never sprouted roots, branches from the bottom, and some did. So here's my solution. Do not plant understory plants immediately underneath them. Just surround the base of the tree with mulch, and don't plant other plants underneath, and then you can see the new sprouts come up when they're real little. You can maintain the tree as a little miniature tree. Another way is you can plant annuals underneath it and change them out twice a year. When I did this, just the process of me digging the soil to change out my annuals, it kind of, in this rework of the soil, it kind of disturbed the new sprouts of the tree, and it helped me to contain them. Another fact about the yaupon: the Latin name comes from the incorrect belief by Europeans that this plant caused vomiting in certain ceremonies. That's why the name is Ilex vomitoria. I recommend this tree. These are trees in my yard. That one is such a gorgeous specimen, and that's in Neil Sperry's yard. My little tree, I have to contain it smaller because you can see on the upper right corner it was planted too close to my foundation, so I have to keep it trimmed. I try to keep it as naturally looking as possible because the builder left me no choice but to keep it off the side of my house. You can see the berries on the one picture in the middle, and then I took the other picture. The berries have not turned red. They turn red in the fall and stay that way all winter. The desert willow. I think it is the most heat and drought tolerant of any of the trees we discussed, and it may be the most drought tolerant for our area. The problem with it is it's so drought tolerant it may not accept the irrigation from a sprinkler system if you want to put it in your landscape and surround it by turf grass. Since our area can receive 30 or more inches of rain in a year, so it's important to plant this tree where it is elevated considerably above grade. It is an important tree used in xeriscaping. It is fast growing and small, about 30 foot tall, 10 to 20 foot wide. It is native to all of the Southwest, and it is naturally occurring in dry washes. What's so pretty about it is it blooms from May through September with large, large funnel-shaped flowers, and they are so pretty. And then after that, which is right now, the ones I've seen are starting to do this, they form seed pods, and the seed pods are attractive to hummingbirds and songbirds. It's kind of has shrub-like branching, and you kind of have to train this tree to be the form you want it to be. The leaves are kind of thin, and they're a little thin and willow-like. That's hence the name desert willow. Common characteristic is these leaves. Drought tolerant. They have a lot of sub-varieties. I can't tell you which ones are what color. That's why I tried to put a color. The one in the upper right-hand corner is the one growing in our demonstration garden, and it is all one color. Then I added a couple more that I found off the web. There's a white one, and then there's one that is two-toned. The one in the picture is our demo garden. Desert willow is, I don't know how old it is. It might be 10 years old, and it's still small. I bet that tree is only about 10 to 12 foot tall, so it makes it really good for a small yard. Just have to remember it would be easy to over-irrigate this tree. Eve's necklace is another small tree that would work well in a small yard. It can be used as an understory tree in a shaded area. The branches kind of tend to vine outward when it's in a shaded area because it's trying to search for sun. The upper right photo from the Fort Worth Botanic Garden is an example of that. That tree, that branching is kind of outward from the main trunk because it's in a shaded area. In mid-spring, it has clusters of these pink flowers, and they last for a couple of weeks, and then they turn into black seed pods. And those seed pods kind of look like a necklace, and that's how it gets its name. One negative, however, is those seeds are toxic. Probably wouldn't be appropriate if you have dogs that would eat seed off the tree. It is about 15 foot tall, gets about 10 foot wide at maturity, and it occurs naturally in limestone soils in north central Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. It is very drought tolerant. The pollinators love it. And I think this specimen, I don't know where that specimen came from. It was out of the Texas Urban Forestry Council, but that looks like a very old tree. And I like the way it's shaped. I would like to have one of these trees. I recommend this one again. Here is another option for a small yard. A lot of people don't do this. I don't see it happening very long. I think it's an extremely good idea. These are my two favorite large shrubs. I've grown both of them. They are absolutely gorgeous. And they're kind of commonly, it's not just me, everybody likes these shrubs. One is the Nellie R. Stevens. Another is the Mary Nell. And a third is the Burford. I didn't put a picture of the Burford in here. It looks just like these, though. The Nellie R. Stevens, it's dark green, shiny, evergreen, red berries, and it has this pyramidal shape. This one on the far left side looks more more square shaped. The one on the far right side looks like it's been pruned a little bit more pyramidal. They're real fast growing. Both of these species are. They roughly 15 to 25 foot tall, 8 to 12 foot wide. They are used as privacy screens and hedges when they're in their natural form, but they make a fine standalone plant. One thing that is unfortunate about this plant, because they look like the dwarf Burford, they are frequently planted incorrectly, too close to houses or too close to any other kind of hardscape, because a dwarf Burford only grows to about 4 foot tall, and these plants can go to 25 foot tall, 12 foot wide. So that's a precaution. You have to make sure that you read the tags and go to a reliable source to buy these trees. If you buy a large one, they're a little bit more expensive than some. Good things about them, they prefer full sun. They sometimes would kind of like a little bit of afternoon shade. They're not as drought tolerant as some of the others we've discussed. They accept a wide range of soils and temperatures. The Nellie Stevens is a cross between an English holly and a Japanese holly. An interesting story about the Nellie R. Stevens. Nellie R. Stevens herself was a school teacher, and in 1900 she visited the U.S. Botanic Garden in Washington, D.C., and she accidentally, on purpose, kept a few seeds. Well, with a little bit of help from the bees, this new variety was created, and it stayed in her garden for years and years and years. But in 1952, there was a visiting horticulturist, and later the American Holly Society could not identify this holly in her garden. So they decided it was a new variety, and they named it after her. The Mary Nell Stevens is the far right, and it is almost identical. The Mary Nell is the far right picture, and it is almost identical to the Nellie Stevens. I prefer the Mary Nail over the Nellie Stevens. I think it grows thicker, and the leaves, you can see in the leaf picture, they are serrated, whereas the Nellie R. Stevens, they just have, what do they have, about 5 prongs on them. The Mary Nail is just an outstanding shrub. It is so pretty, and it's that way 365 days a year. And as I'm finishing up, I just wanted to give you a list of recommendations I have for trees. I have all these books and I've read all of them. This might be a good screen to take a screenshot of and add to your horticultural library, or just check them out. Sometimes sitting and just reading, you gain a whole lot more insight about these trees. I think especially Edward Gilman taught me a whole lot about trees after reading his book. Okay, and to finish up, I wanted to give you a list of the major sources that I used in preparation for this little talk. Might want to take a screen print of it. Sometimes these websites are very useful. I just want to give credit to all these people. They've taught me a lot about trees. And I guess that's all. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to ask questions after the video. Thank you very much.